I'm so grateful that you've decided to join me today. My name is Megan Fitzgibbons, and I'm the Instructional Services Coordinator at Concordia University Library. And my presentation is called Applying Principles of Mindfulness and Embodiment in Library Instruction to Foster Wellness. This is a brief agenda for today's presentation. I'll start by looking at basic principles of mindfulness and embodiment, and then make a connection to how these can apply to library instruction. I'll have some examples for possibilities for incorporating mindfulness and embodiment in library instruction, and I hope that you will use the chat or contact me later on to share your suggestions or anything that you would like to discuss about this topic. I'd love to be able to continue some conversations. I'd like to start by offering some definitions and background before we go any further. I'm quite aware that the topic of mindfulness is rife with the danger of cultural appropriation. Many of the concepts and practices related to mindfulness have been intellectual, spiritual, and cultural practices in many societies and traditions across the world since time immemorial. For example, I'm speaking to you from Concordia University, which is located in Tiohtià:ke or Montreal on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters where I live, work, and benefit. A significant aspect of mindfulness is developing an understanding of historical context and one's own place in political, cultural, and spiritual dimensions. With this in mind, I just want to be clear that I'm not suggesting that these practices be extracted and removed from context and then plugged into library instruction, particularly in the colonial institutions at our universities. However, I think that there is great potential for study and learning for librarians and practitioners in these areas, and for applying this learning to humanize library instruction and information literacy. There are mountains of literature on mindfulness in higher education and a fair bit in librarianship as well. So for the purpose of this presentation, I just want to give a brief introduction to set the context. So when I'm using the term mindfulness, there is some overlap with contemplative pedagogy and reflective practice, but I'm trying to talk about the term more broadly. The study of mindfulness in the West is often connected to secular contexts and even neuroscience and psychology. So John Kabat-Zinn, one of the most recognized experts on mindfulness in Western contexts, described mindfulness as paying attention on purpose, or directing one's consciousness to thoughts, feelings, and emotions, or put another way, physical, emotional, and mental experiences. A key part of mindfulness practice also includes openness to discovery and a curiosity about one's own feelings, and especially reactions to those feelings. This slide shows some examples of mindfulness practices, which include meditation, chanting, reflective practice, journaling, walking meditation, yoga, and mindfulness-based stress reduction, also known as MBSR. There has been a fair amount of application and study of mindfulness in higher education. One interesting meta-analysis was conducted in 2019 by Bamber and Morpeth, and it found a statistically significant reduction of university students' anxiety through mindful-based interventions. List of references at the end, but I just want to highlight a few key works here related to mindfulness in higher education, as well as just more generally. And now I'd like to talk a little bit more about the concept of embodiment. So embodiment is the relationship between what's happening inside and outside the body, and it includes an awareness of a person's own self, as well as the dimensions of time and space, as well as social environments. So on the slide is a definition from Geneviève Aymon, and the definition is: embodiment is embedded in the continuous movement of external sense perception, proprioception, which is the internal or sixth sense, graviception, or the relationship with gravity, and kinesthetic self-perception. Kinesthesia is the sense of movement. So embodiment includes several different dimensions. This is not an exhaustive definition, but these are concepts that are bundled and grouped together when we're talking about embodiment. So somatic awareness, which is awareness of the process of living inside the body. So it comes from the Greek word soma, which refers to the living body, as opposed to just the body. So the living, the feeling of the living inside the body. We're also here talking about spatial experiences, knowledge gained through the body. So we often say getting a feel for something, or we're talking about muscle memory. And Marcia Bates has written about the concept of embodied information, which is the corporeal or the bodily expression or manifestation of information that was previously in an encoded form. And once again, just some key works for anyone who would like to learn more about embodiment. The first two are related to information studies contexts, and the final three are general textbooks. So this is a quote from Martha Eddy from one of the works that was mentioned on the previous slide. Mindfulness that includes somatic awareness opens the gateway to various types of connectedness within a person, between people, and with the mysterious or unknown. And I think this is such a fitting conceptualization when we're talking about information seeking and research and information literacy, because those processes are also about discovery and finding connections. So speaking of connections, I hope that my brief overviews of mindfulness and embodiment have sparked a bit of interest in finding the connections with information literacy and with library instruction. I've found in the literature that although there is an emphasis on mindfulness as something that can benefit librarians in their professional practice or their personal practice, or students generally, again as humans, as people. But in the literature, there's less that is specifically on implications for the research process or information behavior or information literacy in situ. So that's what I'm going to discuss now. Information literacy instruction often focuses exclusively on cognitive or thinking aspects of the information seeking task. For example, refining a topic, selecting a database, or evaluating sources. Emotional and physical experiences are rarely addressed, even in broad conceptualizations like the framework for information literacy for higher education from ACRL. But there is a lot of research evidence that there are physical and emotional challenges experienced during the information search process. Kuhlthau's iconic information search process and work in information behavior and information literacy that has built on hers, it is accepted that emotional experiences are intertwined with physical behaviors and cognitive processes in the information search process. And this interplay is deserving of much deeper investigation and understanding in the practice of librarianship. I often show Kuhlthau's information search process model to students to help them understand that it's normal and very good, in fact, to feel a range of emotions and thoughts when seeking information, and it's important to be aware of and accept them. I also want to bring in the element of technostress. This is stress that's associated with information technologies, and their use for long periods of time. And I think we're all aware that this has worsened during the pandemic. It's a pervasive phenomenon among university students, and it consists of physical and emotional feelings of disorientation and disembodiment. And it can be detrimental to learning and to information literacy development. Another common phenomenon in the academic context is that learners generally experience emotional vulnerability to varying degrees during the course of their studies, and specifically in the information search process or the assignment completion process. And I think this is important to bring up when we're talking about an approach of incorporating learners' minds and bodies in order to contribute to inclusive education environments. We know that groups that are marginalized or oppressed within society can have their lived experiences, the truth of their lived experiences, denied or diminished, and they also have increased vulnerability to many stressors in the environment, but specifically in this context, technostress and research anxiety. And so I'm going to go into more detail now about how mindfulness practices can hold space for experiences and be more open rather than privileging the teaching of correct actions in information seeking. So overall, the outcomes of incorporating mindfulness practices and embodiment principles to center the mind and body include allowing learners to develop intentionality in selecting and evaluating information resources, openness in preparing the mind for serendipity or discovery, creativity and creative thinking, and general well-being by preventing or ameliorating stress and anxiety. So that leads us to the application, where I'm going to talk more specifically about what I mean by possibilities for incorporating mindfulness and embodiment in library instruction. So I'll begin by discussing a workshop that I developed for graduate students that was held as a part of a writing retreat event that focused on, the workshop itself focused on information search strategies for thesis research, part of a larger writing retreat event. So this was a short workshop, only 1 hour, but I tried to incorporate 4 elements that went beyond the ideas of information search strategies that are typically part of library instruction. So the 4 elements were reflection, which included having the students identify their sticking points or tensions in their own process, intentionality in the task of selecting search strategies according to the needs of the present, according to their reflection, developing habits that would allow them to reduce the feelings of overwhelm or information overload using relevant tools for organizing their resources or managing their resources, and throughout this awareness of and paying attention to physical sensations and their thoughts and feelings in the process. I'm going to show a few sample slides from the workshop. This is one of the workshop slides. Near the beginning of the workshop, students were asked to take 2 minutes to draw a diagram or a picture of their research or their information search process for their thesis, and to identify where they were starting, what is their path, and any sticking points also. That's not on the slide. It was brought up through the workshop, and then we used that through the rest of the workshop to help them continue to reflect on their search process, and then to connect the strategies that I presented to that process that they had mapped for themselves. So this is just a slide to show the search techniques that I taught, very standard sort of information seeking strategies, but the point was that these were put into the context of their process that they had mapped out. During a short pause at the middle of the workshop, I also gave some suggestions for taking a break to reduce stress and allow students to open their mind and recenter. So some activities for proprioceptive input. So this is again that the sense of the body in and the muscles in movement. So those were some examples offered, such as spinning in an office chair, balancing on something, lifting something heavy, squeezing a stress ball, or creating something with your hands, such as knitting, kneading, or a kneading dough. As well as some centering practices. So taking out a pen and paper and tracking the pen along the paper in moving the line up when breathing in and down when exhaling out. And other practices of just taking a moment to observe the sounds around you, ideally outside, noticing sensations in your body and accepting them without further judgment, or setting a timer for 2 minutes and letting all thoughts go. The workshop also included a short exercise with the wheel of emotions. There's many conceptualizations of this tool, the wheel of emotions tool. You can Google it to find other examples, but this is the one that I used. So the students were asked to think about where they were in their research process and what emotions they were feeling. Could be more than one at the given moment. And from there, then we could think about how they were feeling and how that, again, might connect with the search strategies that I mentioned earlier. So if they're feeling overwhelmed, the technique that I called pearl growing, or using one good article to find others, can be quite helpful because it gives a direction and a concrete task. Whereas at other points in the research process, when other emotions are coming to the surface, other techniques might be more relevant. So the idea is using the body and the emotions and the mind as cues for how to direct the research process or the information search process. So this was the concluding slide of the workshop, a reminder of the mindfulness techniques and reminding students to allow the key parts of the process, like selecting search tools and serendipity and concentration, to happen depending on the stage of their process as well as their own feelings. In terms of my learning from the workshop, I had hoped to encourage outcomes in the areas of reflection, awareness, intentionality, and habits. And the workshop has only been run once so far, and I do feel, based on the students' participation and engagement in activities during the workshop, that they were able to engage in reflection and to develop an awareness of their mind and body during the research process for their thesis. The area of intentionality, I think the workshop was simply too short for them to really apply the mindfulness or the practices of awareness to be able to apply that to their behavior in their search. So that maybe was not achieved in the short time of the workshop. And as is frequently the case with library instruction, at this point I don't have a sense of whether the students built habits or ways of working that they can carry forward as a result of the workshop. So that will be something to focus on evaluating in future iterations. I certainly have a lot of work to do further in this space, in my own practice, continuing to develop my own practice and praxis of somatic awareness and mindfulness to understand the connections with information literacy, and also to continue to engage in conversations with students to understand how to light sparks in their thinking about mindfulness in the context of their research and learning. I just want to offer a few other ideas besides my own that I presented for incorporating mindfulness in library instruction. First, there's a very interesting article, Ahern 2018, about the idea of embodying databases. So students are taken through a simulation exercise where they have a sort of role play, pretending they're databases as well as database users, to evoke some of the emotions that often come up through the research process, as well as to give a spatial understanding of going to a database as a place and what that means in terms of the scope of the resource. In the Mindful Librarian book, edited by Richard Moniz and others, there's a description of how to incorporate mindfulness, particularly in the topic selection of the research process. So scaffolding this really crucial part of the process with mindfulness activities and opportunities for reflection. Concept mapping is something that I have a lot of interest in, and I think it really lends itself to mindfulness practice when it's done in multiple iterations. So using a pen and paper followed by using software, also by explaining a concept map to others. I think it's a visual tool that can incorporate multiple senses and can be a really useful tool for building knowledge. And finally, I think there are opportunities to be explored in combining digital ways of interacting with information with physical. For example, using large format interactive screens as a way to allow students to use their whole body in a different way than they normally would, sitting at a laptop hunched over a small trackpad or mouse, and rather being able to use their whole body to explore information seeking. So those are some areas where I think there's a lot more work and exploration possible. So overall, I think that the concepts that are related but very separate of mindfulness and embodiment have a lot of potential for incorporation in library instruction in order to center learners' minds and bodies. And the goal of doing this is to support their holistic engagement in research and information seeking that allows them to engage with the information process with their whole being. Thank you very, very much for your attention, and I would be so grateful to hear what you think, either questions or suggestions in the chat, or please feel free to contact me directly. Thank you.